Chapter 26 of Cousin Pons by Honoré de Balzac, translated by Ellen Marriage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 26. While Madame Cibot's back was turned, Fraisier nimbly slipped a sheet of blank paper into the envelope. The will he put in his pocket. He next proceeded to seal the envelope again so cleverly that he showed the seal to Madame Cibot when she returned, and asked her if she could see the slightest trace of the operation. La Cibot took up the envelope, felt it over, assured herself that it was not empty, and heaved a deep sigh. She had entertained hopes that Fraisier himself would have burned the unlucky document while she was out of the room. "Well, my dear Monsieur Fraisier, what is to be done?" "Oh, that is your affair. I am not one of the next of kin myself, but if I had the slightest claim to any of that," indicating the collection, "I know very well what I should do." "That is just what I want to know," La Cibot answered with sufficient simplicity. "There is a fire in the grate," he said. Then he rose to go. "After all, no one will know about it but you and me," began La Cibot. "It can never be proved that a will existed," asserted the man of law. "And you?" "I? If Monsieur Pons dies intestate, you shall have 100,000 francs." "Oh yes, no doubt," returned she. "People promise you heaps of money, and when they come by their own, and there is talk of paying, they swindle you like Elie Magus," she was going to say, but she stopped herself just in time. "I am going," said Fraisier. "It is not to your interest that I should be found here, but I shall see you again downstairs." La Cibot shut the door and returned with the sealed packet in her hand. She had quite made up her mind to burn it. But as she went towards the bedroom fireplace, she felt the grasp of a hand on each arm, and saw Schmucke on one hand, and Pons himself on the other, leaning against the partition wall on either side of the door. La Cibot cried out and fell face downwards in a fit. Real or feigned, no one ever knew the truth. This sight produced such an impression on Pons that a deadly faintness came upon him, and Schmucke left the woman on the floor to help Pons back to bed. The friends trembled in every limb. They had set themselves a hard task. It was done, but it had been too much for their strength. When Pons lay in bed again, and Schmucke had regained strength to some extent, he heard a sound of sobbing. La Cibot, on her knees, bursting into tears, held out supplicating hands to them in very expressive pantomime. "It was pure curiosity," she sobbed, when she saw that Pons and Schmucke were paying attention to her proceedings. "Pure curiosity, a woman's fault, you know, but I did not know how else to get a sight of your will, and I brought it back again." "Go," said Schmucke, standing erect, his tall figure gaining in height by the full height of his indignation. "You are a monster. You tried to kill mein gut Pons. He is right. You are worse than a monster. You are a lost soul." La Cibot saw the look of abhorrence in the frank German's face. She rose, proud as Tartuffe, gave Schmucke a glance which made him quake, and went out, carrying off under her dress an exquisite little picture of Metzu's, pointed out by Elie Magus. A diamond, he had called it. Fraisier, downstairs in the porter's lodge, was waiting to hear that La Cibot had burned the envelope and the sheet of blank paper inside it. Great was his astonishment when he beheld his fair client's agitation and dismay. "What has happened?" "This has happened, my dear Monsieur Fraisier. Under pretence of giving me good advice and telling me what to do, you have lost me my annuity and the gentleman's confidence." One of the word tornadoes in which she excelled was in full progress, but Fraisier cut her short. "This is idle talk. The facts, and be quick about it." "Well, it came about in this way." And she told him of the scene which she had just come through. "You have lost nothing through me," was Fraisier's comment. "The gentlemen had their doubts, or they would not have set this trap for you. They were lying in wait and spying upon you. You have not told me everything," he added, with a tiger's glance at the woman before him. "I hide anything from you?" cried she. "After all that we have done together?" she added with a shudder. "My dear madame, I have done nothing blameworthy," returned Fraisier. Evidently he meant to deny his nocturnal visit to Pons' rooms. Every hair on La Cibot's head seemed to scorch her, while a sense of icy cold swept over her from head to foot. "What?" she faltered in bewilderment. "Here is a criminal charge on the face of it. You may be accused of suppressing the will," Fraisier made answer dryly. La Cibot started. "Don't be alarmed, I am your legal adviser. I only wished to show you how easy it is, in one way or another, to do as I once explained to you. Let us see now. What have you done that this simple German should be hiding in the room?" "Nothing at all. Unless it was that scene the other day when I stood Monsieur Pons out that his eyes dazzled. And ever since, the two gentlemen have been as different as can be. So you have brought all my troubles upon me. I might have lost my influence with Monsieur Pons, but I was sure of the German. Just now he was talking of marrying me, or of taking me with him. It is all one." The excuse was so plausible that Fraisier was fain to be satisfied with it. "You need fear nothing," he resumed. "I gave you my word that you shall have your money, and I shall keep my word. The whole matter so far was up in the air, but now it is as good as banknotes. You shall have at least 1,200 francs per annum. But, my good lady, you must act intelligently under my orders." "Yes, my dear Monsieur Fraisier," said La Cibot with cringing servility. She was completely subdued. "Very good. Good-bye." And Fraisier went, taking the dangerous document with him. He reached home in great spirits. The will was a terrible weapon. "Now," thought he, "I have a hold on Madame la Présidente de Marville. She must keep her word with me. If she did not, she would lose the property." At daybreak, when Remonencq had taken down his shutters and left his sister in charge of the shop, he came, after his wont of late, to inquire for his good friend Cibot. The portress was contemplating the Metzu, privately wondering how a little bit of painted wood could be worth such a lot of money. "Aha!" said he, looking over her shoulder. "That is the one picture which Monsieur Elie Magus regretted. With that little bit of a thing, he says, his happiness would be complete." "What would he give for it?" asked La Cibot. "Why, if you will promise to marry me within a year of widowhood, I will undertake to get 20,000 francs for it from Elie Magus. And unless you marry me, you will never get 1,000 francs for the picture." "Why not?" "Because you would be obliged to give a receipt for the money, and then you might have a lawsuit with the heirs at law. If you were my wife, I myself should sell the thing to Monsieur Magus, and in the way of business it is enough to make an entry in the day book, and I should note that Monsieur Schmucke sold it to me. There, leave the panel with me. If your husband were to die, you might have a lot of bother over it, but no one would think it odd that I should have a picture in the shop. You know me quite well. Besides, I will give you a receipt, if you like." The covetous portress felt that she had been caught. She agreed to a proposal which was to bind her for the rest of her life to the marine store dealer. "You are right," said she, as she locked the picture away in a chest. "Bring me the bit of writing." Remonencq beckoned her to the door. "I can see, neighbor, that we shall not save our poor dear Cibot," he said, lowering his voice. "Dr. Poulain gave him up yesterday evening, and said that he could not last out the day. It is a great misfortune, but after all, this was not the place for you. You ought to be in a fine curiosity shop on the Boulevard des Capucines. Do you know that I have made nearly 100,000 francs in 10 years? And if you will have as much some day, I will undertake to make a handsome fortune for you as my wife. You would be the mistress, my sister should wait on you and do the work of the house, and—" A heartrending moan from the little tailor cut the tempter short. The death agony had begun. "Go away," said La Cibot. "You are a monster to talk of such things, and my poor man dying like this." "Ah, it is because I love you," said Remonencq. "I could let everything else go to have you." "If you loved me, you would say nothing to me just now," returned she. And Remonencq departed to his shop, sure of marrying La Cibot. Towards 10 o'clock there was a sort of commotion in the street. Monsieur Cibot was taking the sacrament. All the friends of the pair, all the porters and porters' wives in the Rue de Normandie and neighboring streets, had crowded into the lodge, under the archway, and stood on the pavement outside. Nobody so much as noticed the arrival of Monsieur Leopold Hannequin and a brother lawyer. Schwab and Brunner reached Pons' rooms unseen by Madame Cibot. The notary, inquiring for Pons, was shown upstairs by the portress of a neighboring house. Brunner remembered his previous visit to the museum, and went straight in with his friend Schwab. Pons formally revoked his previous will, and constituted Schmucke his universal legatee. This accomplished, he thanked Schwab and Brunner, and earnestly begged Monsieur Leopold Hannequin to protect Schmucke's interests. The demands made upon him by last night's scene with La Cibot, and this final settlement of his worldly affairs, left him so faint and exhausted that Schmucke begged Schwab to go for the Abbé Duplanty. It was Pons' great desire to take the sacrament, and Schmucke could not bring himself to leave his friend. La Cibot, sitting at the foot of her husband's bed, gave not so much as a thought to Schmucke's breakfast. For that matter, had been forbidden to return. But the morning's events, the sight of Pons' heroic resignation in the death agony, so oppressed Schmucke's heart that he was not conscious of hunger. Towards 2 o'clock, however, as nothing had been seen of the old German, La Cibot sent Remonencq's sister to see whether Schmucke wanted anything, prompted not so much by interest as by curiosity. The Abbé Duplanty had just heard the old musician's dying confession, and the administration of the sacrament of extreme unction was disturbed by repeated ringing of the door-bell. Pons, in his terror of robbery, had made Schmucke promise solemnly to admit no one into the house, so Schmucke did not stir. Again and again Mademoiselle Remonencq pulled the cord, and finally went downstairs in alarm to tell La Cibot that Schmucke would not open the door. Fraisier made a note of this. Schmucke had never seen anyone die in his life. Before long he would be perplexed by the many difficulties which beset those who are left with a dead body in Paris. This more especially if they are lonely and helpless and have no one to act for them. Fraisier knew, moreover, that in real affliction people lose their heads, and therefore immediately after breakfast he took up his position in the porter's lodge, and, sitting there in perpetual committee with Dr. Poulain, conceived the idea of directing all Schmucke's actions himself. To obtain the important result, the doctor and the lawyer took their measures on this wise. The beadle of Saint Francois, Cantinet by name, at one time a retail dealer in glassware, lived in the Rue d'Orléans, next door to Dr. Poulain and under the same roof. Madame Cantinet, who saw to the letting of the chairs at Saint François, once had fallen ill, and Dr. Poulain had attended her gratuitously. She was, as might be expected, grateful, and often confided her troubles to him. The Nutcrackers, punctual in their attendance at Saint François on Sundays and saints' days, were on friendly terms with the beadle and the lowest ecclesiastical rank and file, commonly called in Paris le bas clergé, to whom the devout usually give little presents from time to time. Madame Cantinet therefore knew Schmucke almost as well as Schmucke knew her. And Madame Cantinet was afflicted with two sore troubles, which enabled the lawyer to use her as a blind and involuntary agent. Cantinet junior, a stage-struck youth, had deserted the paths of the church and turned his back on the prospect of one day becoming a beadle, to make his debut among the supernumeraries of the Cirque Olympique. He was leading a wild life, breaking his mother's heart and draining her purse by frequent forced loans. Cantinet senior, much addicted to spirituous liquors and idleness, had in fact been driven to retire from business by those two failings. So far from reforming, the incorrigible offender had found scope in his new occupation for the indulgence of both cravings. He did nothing, and he drank with drivers of wedding coaches, with the undertaker's men at funerals, with poor folk relieved by the vicar, till his morning's occupation was set forth in rubric on his countenance by noon. Madame Cantinet saw no prospect but want in her old age, and yet she had brought her husband 12,000 francs, she said. The tale of her woes, related for the 100th time, suggested an idea to Dr. Poulain. Once introduce her into the old bachelor's quarters, and it will be easy by her means to establish Madame Sauvage there as working housekeeper. It was quite impossible to present Madame Sauvage herself, for the Nutcrackers had grown suspicious of everyone. Schmucke's refusal to admit Mademoiselle Remonencq had sufficiently opened Fraisier's eyes. Still, it seemed evident that Pons and Schmucke, being pious souls, would take anyone recommended by the Abbé with blind confidence. Madame Cantinet should bring Madame Sauvage with her, and to put in Fraisier's servant was almost tantamount to installing Fraisier himself. The Abbé Duplanty, coming downstairs, found the gateway blocked by the Cibots' friends, all of them bent upon showing their interest in one of the oldest and most respectable porters in the Marais. Dr. Poulain raised his hat and took the Abbé aside. "I am just about to go to poor Monsieur Pons," he said. "There is still a chance of recovery, but it is a question of inducing him to undergo an operation. The calculi are perceptible to the touch. They are setting up an inflammatory condition which will end fatally, but perhaps it is not too late to remove them. You should really use your influence to persuade the patient to submit to surgical treatment. I will answer for his life, provided that no untoward circumstance occurs during the operation." "I will return as soon as I have taken the sacred ciborium back to the church," said the Abbé Duplanty, "for Monsieur Schmucke's condition claims the support of religion." "I have just heard that he is alone," said Dr. Poulain. "The German, good soul, had a little altercation this morning with Madame Cibot, who has acted as housekeeper to them both for the past 10 years. They have quarrelled, for the moment only, no doubt, but under the circumstances they must have some one in to help upstairs. It would be a charity to look after him. I say, Cantinet," continued the doctor, beckoning to the beadle, Just go and ask your wife if she will nurse Monsieur Pons and look after Monsieur Schmucke, and take Mme. Cibot's place for a day or two. Even without the quarrel, Mme. Cibot would still require a substitute. Mme. Cantinet is honest," added the doctor, turning to Monsieur Duplanty. "You could not make a better choice," said the good priest. "She is entrusted with the letting of chairs in the church." A few minutes later, Dr. Poulain stood by Pons's pillow, watching the progress made by death, and Schmucke's vain efforts to persuade his friend to consent to the operation. To all the poor German's despairing entreaties, Pons only replied by a shake of the head and occasional impatient movements, till, after a while, he summoned up all his fast-failing strength to say, with a heart-rending look, "Do let me die in peace." Schmucke almost died of sorrow, but he took Pons's hand and softly kissed it, and held it between his own, as if trying a second time to give his own vitality to his friend. Just at this moment the bell rang, and Dr. Poulain, going to the door, admitted the Abbe Duplanty. "Our poor patient is struggling in the grasp of death," he said. "All will be over in a few hours. You will send a priest, no doubt, to watch to-night. But it is time that Mme. Cantinet came, as well as a woman to do the work, for Monsieur Schmucke is quite unfit to think of anything. I am afraid for his reason, and there are valuables here which ought to be in the custody of honest persons." The Abbe Duplanty, a kindly, upright priest, guileless and unsuspicious, was struck with the truth of Dr. Poulain's remarks. He had, moreover, a certain belief in the doctor of the quarter. So, on the threshold of the death chamber, he stopped and beckoned to Schmucke, but Schmucke could not bring himself to loosen the grasp of the hand that grew tighter and tighter. Pons seemed to think that he was slipping over the edge of a precipice and must catch at something to save himself. But, as many know, the dying are haunted by an hallucination that leads them to snatch at things about them, like men eager to save their most precious possessions from a fire. Presently Pons released Schmucke to clutch at the bedclothes, dragging them and huddling them about himself with a hasty, covetous movement, significant and painful to see. "What will you do, left alone with your dead friend?" asked Monsieur l'Abbe Duplanty when Schmucke came to the door. "You have not Mme. Cibot now." "Ein monster dat have killed Pons." "But you must have somebody with you," began Dr. Poulain. "Some one must sit up with the body to-night." "I shall sit up, I shall say die prayers to Gott," the innocent German answered. "But you must eat, and who is to cook for you now?" asked the doctor. "Grief have taken away mine appetite," Schmucke said simply. "And some one must give notice to the registrar," said Poulain, "and lay out the body and order the funeral, and the person who sits up with the body and the priest will want meals. Can't you do all this by yourself? A man cannot die like a dog in the capital of the civilized world." Schmucke opened wide eyes of dismay. A brief fit of madness seized him. "But Bons shall not die!" he cried aloud. "I shall save him." "You cannot go without sleep much longer, and who will take your place? Some one must look after Monsieur Pons, and give him drink, and nurse him." "Ah, dat is true." "Very well," said the abbe. "I am thinking of sending you Madame Cantinet, a good and honest creature." The practical details of the care of the dead bewildered Schmucke, till he was fain to die with his friend. "He is a child," said the doctor, turning to the Abbe Duplanty. "Ein child," Schmucke repeated mechanically. "There, then," said the curate, "I will speak to Madame Cantinet and send her to you." "Do not trouble yourself," said the doctor. "I am going home, and she lives in the next house." The dying seem to struggle with death as with an invisible assassin. In the agony at the last, as the final thrust is made, the act of dying seems to be a conflict, a hand-to-hand fight for life. Pons had reached the supreme moment. At the sound of his groans and cries, the three standing in the doorway hurried to the bedside. Then came the last blow, smiting asunder the bonds between soul and body, striking down to life's sources, and suddenly Pons regained for a few brief moments the perfect calm that follows the struggle. He came to himself, and with the serenity of death in his face, he looked round almost smilingly at them. "Ah, doctor, I have had a hard time of it, but you were right, I am doing better. Thank you, my good abbe. I was wondering what had become of Schmucke." "Schmucke has had nothing to eat since yesterday evening, and now it is 4 o'clock. You have no one with you now, and it would be wise to send for Madame Cibot." "She is capable of anything," said Pons, without attempting to conceal all his abhorrence at the sound of her name. "It is true, Schmucke ought to have some trustworthy person." "Monsieur Duplanty and I have been thinking about you both." "Ah, thank you. I had not thought of that." "And Monsieur Duplanty suggests that you should have Madame Cantinet." "Oh, Madame Cantinet, who lets the chairs!" exclaimed Pons. "Yes, she is an excellent creature." "She has no liking for Madame Cibot," continued the doctor, "and she would take good care of Monsieur Schmucke." "Send her to me, Monsieur Duplanty. Send her, and her husband too. I shall be easy. Nothing will be stolen here." Schmucke had taken Pons's hand again, and held it joyously in his own. Pons was almost well again, he thought. "Let us go, Monsieur l'Abbe," said the doctor. "I will send Madame Cantinet round at once. I see how it is. She perhaps may not find Monsieur Pons alive." End of chapter 26. Chapter 27 of Cousin Pons by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by Ellen Marriage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 27. While the Abbe Duplanty was persuading Pons to engage Madame Cantinet as his nurse, Fraisier had sent for her. He had plied the beadle's wife with sophistical reasoning and subtlety. It was difficult to resist his corrupting influence. And as for Madame Cantinet, a lean, sallow woman with large teeth and thin lips, her intelligence, as so often happens with women of the people, had been blunted by a hard life, till she had come to look upon the slenderest daily wage as prosperity. She soon consented to take Madame Sauvage with her as general servant. Madame Sauvage had had her instructions already. She had undertaken to weave a web of iron wire about the two musicians, and to watch them as a spider watches a fly caught in the toils, and her reward was to be a tobacconist's license. Fraisier had found a convenient opportunity of getting rid of his so-called foster mother, while he posted her as a detective and policeman to supervise Madame Cantinet. As there was a servant's bedroom and a little kitchen included in the apartment, La Sauvage could sleep on a truckle bed and cook for the German. Dr. Poulain came with the two women just as Pons drew his last breath. Schmucke was sitting beside his friend, all unconscious of the crisis, holding the hand that slowly grew colder in his grasp. He signed to Madame Cantinet to be silent, but Madame Sauvage's soldierly figure surprised him so much that he started in spite of himself, a kind of homage to which the virago was quite accustomed. "Monsieur Duplanty answers for this lady," whispered Madame Cantinet by way of introduction. "She once was cook to a bishop. She is honesty itself. She will do the cooking." "Oh, you may talk out loud," wheezed the stalwart dame. "The poor gentleman is dead. He has just gone." A shrill cry broke from Schmucke. He felt Pons' cold hand stiffening in his, and sat staring into his friend's eyes. The look in them would have driven him mad if Mme. Sauvage, doubtless accustomed to scenes of this sort, had not come to the bedside with a mirror which she held over the lips of the dead. When she saw that there was no mist upon the surface, she briskly snatched Schmucke's hand away. "Just take away your hand, sir. You may not be able to do it in a little while. You do not know how the bones harden. A corpse grows cold very quickly. If you do not lay out a body while it is warm, you have to break the joints later on." And so it was this terrible woman who closed the poor dead musician's eyes. With a businesslike dexterity acquired in 10 years of experience, she stripped and straightened the body, laid the arms by the sides, and covered the face with the bedclothes, exactly as a shopman wraps a parcel. "A sheet will be wanted to lay him out. Where is there a sheet?" she demanded, turning on the terror-stricken Schmucke. He had watched the religious ritual, with its deep reverence for the creature made for such high destinies in heaven, and now he saw his dead friend treated simply as a thing in this packing process, saw with the sharp pain that dissolves the very elements of thought. "Do as you will," he answered mechanically. The innocent creature for the first time in his life had seen a man die, and that man was Pons, his only friend, the one human being who understood him and loved him. "I will go and ask Mme. Cibot where the sheets are kept," said La Sauvage. "A truckle bed will be wanted for the person to sleep upon," Mme. Cantinet came to tell Schmucke. Schmucke nodded and broke out into weeping. Mme. Cantinet left the unhappy man in peace, but an hour later she came back to say, "Have you any money, sir, to pay for the things?" The look that Schmucke gave Mme. Cantinet would have disarmed the fiercest hate. It was the white, blank, peaked face of death that he turned upon her, as an explanation that met everything. "Take it all and leave me to mine prayers and tears," he said, and knelt. Mme. Sauvage went to Fraisier with the news of Pons' death. Fraisier took a cab and went to the Presidente. To-morrow she must give him the power of attorney to enable him to act for the heirs. Another hour went by, and Mme. Cantinet came again to Schmucke. "I have been to Mme. Cibot, sir, who knows all about things here," she said. "I asked her to tell me where everything is kept, but she almost jawed me to death with her abuse. Sir, do listen to me." Schmucke looked up at the woman, and she went on, innocent of any barbarous intention, for women of her class are accustomed to take the worst of moral suffering passively, as a matter of course. "We must have linen for the shroud, sir. We must have money to buy a truckle bed for the person to sleep upon, and some things for the kitchen, plates and dishes and glasses, for a priest will be coming to pass the night here, and the person says that there is absolutely nothing in the kitchen." "And what is more, sir, I must have coal and firing if I am to get the dinner ready," echoed La Sauvage, "and not a thing can I find. Not that there is anything so very surprising in that, as La Cibot used to do everything for you." Schmucke lay at the feet of the dead. He heard nothing, knew nothing, saw nothing. Mme. Cantinet pointed to him. "My dear woman, you would not believe me," she said. Whatever you say, he does not answer." "Very well, child," said La Sauvage. "Now I will show you what to do in a case of this kind." She looked round the room as a thief looks in search of possible hiding places for money. Then she went straight to Pons's chest, opened the first drawer, saw the bag in which Schmucke had put the rest of the money after the sale of the pictures, and held it up before him. He nodded mechanically. "Here is money, child," said La Sauvage, turning to Mme. Cantinet. "I will count it first, and take enough to buy everything we want: wine, provisions, wax candles, all sorts of things, in fact, for there is nothing in the house. Just look in the drawers for a sheet to bury him in. I certainly was told that the poor gentleman was simple, but I don't know what he is. He is worse. He is like a newborn child. We shall have to feed him with a funnel." The women went about their work, and Schmucke looked on precisely as an idiot might have done, broken down with sorrow, wholly absorbed in a half cataleptic state. He could not take his eyes from the face that seemed to fascinate him, Pons's face refined by the absolute repose of death. Schmucke hoped to die. Everything was alike indifferent. If the room had been on fire, he would not have stirred. "There are 1,250 francs here," La Sauvage told him. Schmucke shrugged his shoulders. But when La Sauvage came near to measure the body by laying the sheet over it before cutting out the shroud, a horrible struggle ensued between her and the poor German. Schmucke was furious. He behaved like a dog that watches by his dead master's body and shows his teeth at all who try to touch it. La Sauvage grew impatient. She grasped him, set him in the armchair, and held him down with Herculean strength. "Go on, child, sew him in his shroud," she said, turning to Mme. Cantinet. As soon as this operation was completed, La Sauvage set Schmucke back in his place at the foot of the bed. "Do you understand?" said she. "The poor dead man lying there must be done up. There is no help for it." Schmucke began to cry. The women left him and took possession of the kitchen, whither they brought all the necessaries in a very short time. La Sauvage made out a preliminary statement accounting for 360 francs, and then proceeded to prepare a dinner for 4 persons. And what a dinner! A fat goose, the cobbler's pheasant, by way of a substantial roast, an omelette with preserves, a salad, and the inevitable broth, the quantities of the ingredients for this last being so excessive that the soup was more like a strong meat jelly. At 9 o'clock the priest, sent by the curate to watch by the dead, came in with Cantinet, who brought 4 tall wax candles and some tapers. In the death chamber, Schmucke was lying with his arms about the body of his friend, holding him in a tight clasp. Nothing but the authority of religion availed to separate him from his dead. Then the priest settled himself comfortably in the easy chair, and read his prayers, while Schmucke, kneeling beside the couch, besought God to work a miracle and unite him to Pons, so that they might be buried in the same grave. And Mme. Cantinet went on her way to the temple to buy a pallet and complete bedding for Mme. Sauvage. The 1,250 francs were regarded as plunder. At 11 o'clock Mme. Cantinet came in to ask if Schmucke would not eat a morsel, but with a gesture he signified that he wished to be left in peace. "Your supper is ready, Monsieur Pastelot," she said, addressing the priest, and they went. Schmucke, left alone in the room, smiled to himself like a madman free at last to gratify a desire like the longing of pregnancy. He flung himself down beside Pons, and yet again he held his friend in a long, close embrace. At midnight the priest came back and scolded him, and Schmucke returned to his prayers. At daybreak the priest went, and at 7 o'clock in the morning the doctor came to see Schmucke, and spoke kindly, and tried hard to persuade him to eat, but the German refused. "If you do not eat now, you will feel very hungry when you come back," the doctor told him, "for you must go to the mayor's office and take a witness with you, so that the registrar may issue a certificate of death." "I must go!" cried Schmucke in frightened tones. "Who else? You must go, for you were the one person who saw him die." "Mein legs will nicht carry me," pleaded Schmucke, imploring the doctor to come to the rescue. "Take a cab," the hypocritical doctor blandly suggested. "I have given notice already. Ask someone in the house to go with you. The two women will look after the place while you are away." No one imagines how the requirements of the law jar upon a heartfelt sorrow. The thought of it is enough to make one turn from civilization and choose rather the customs of the savage. At 9 o'clock that morning, Madame Sauvage half carried Schmucke downstairs, and from the cab he was obliged to beg Remonencq to come with him to the registrar as a second witness. Here in Paris, in this land of ours besotted with equality, the inequality of conditions is glaringly apparent everywhere and in everything. The immutable tendency of things peeps out even in the practical aspects of death. In well-to-do families, a relative, a friend, or a man of business spares the mourners these painful details. But in this, as in the matter of taxation, the whole burden falls heaviest upon the shoulders of the poor. "Ah, you have good reason to regret him," said Remonencq in answer to the poor martyr's moan. "He was a very good, a very honest man, and he has left a fine collection behind him. But, being a foreigner, sir, do you know that you are like to find yourself in a great predicament? For everybody says that Monsieur Pons left everything to you." Schmucke was not listening. He was sounding the dark depths of sorrow that border upon madness. There is such a thing as tetanus of the soul. "And you would do well to find someone, some man of business, to advise you and act for you," pursued Remonencq. "Ein man of business," echoed Schmucke. "You will find that you will want some one to act for you. If I were you, I should take an experienced man, somebody well known to you in the quarter, a man you can trust. I always go to Tabareau myself for my bits of affairs. He is the bailiff. If you give his clerk power to act for you, you need not trouble yourself any further." Remonencq and La Cibot, prompted by Fraisier, had agreed beforehand to make a suggestion which stuck in Schmucke's memory. For there are times in our lives when grief, as it were, congeals the mind by arresting all its functions, and any chance impression made at such moments is retained by a frost-bound memory. Schmucke heard his companion with such a fixed, mindless stare that Remonencq said no more. "If he is always to be idiotic like this," thought Remonencq, "I might easily buy the whole bag of tricks up yonder for 100,000 francs, if it is really his. Here we are at the mayor's office, sir." Remonencq was obliged to take Schmucke out of the cab, and to half carry him to the registrar's department, where a wedding party was assembled. Here they had to wait for their turn, for, by no very uncommon chance, the clerk had 5 or 6 certificates to make out that morning, and here it was appointed that poor Schmucke should suffer excruciating anguish. "Monsieur is Monsieur Schmucke?" remarked a person in a suit of black. reducing Schmucke to stupefaction by the mention of his name. He looked up with the same blank, unseeing eyes that he had turned upon Remonencq, who now interposed. "What do you want with him?" he said. "Just leave him in peace. You can plainly see that he is in trouble." "The gentleman has just lost his friend, and proposes, no doubt, to do honor to his memory, being, as he is, the sole heir. The gentleman, no doubt, will not haggle over it. He will buy a piece of ground outright for a grave, and as Monsieur Pons was such a lover of the arts, it would be a great pity not to put music, painting, and sculpture on his tomb, 3 handsome full-length figures, weeping." Remonencq waved the speaker away in Auvergnat fashion, but the man replied with another gesture, which, being interpreted, means "Don't spoil sport," a piece of commercial freemasonry, as it were, which the dealer understood. "I represent the firm of Sonnet and Company, monumental stone masons. Sir Walter Scott would have dubbed me Young Mortality," continued this person. "If you, sir, should decide to entrust your orders to us, we would spare you the trouble of the journey to purchase the ground necessary for the interment of a friend lost to the arts." At this Remonencq nodded assent, and jogged Schmucke's elbow. "Every day we receive orders from families to arrange all formalities," continued he of the black coat, thus encouraged by Remonencq. "In the first moment of bereavement, the heir at law finds it very difficult to attend to such matters, and we are accustomed to perform these little services for our clients. Our charges, sir, are on a fixed scale, so much per foot, freestone or marble. Family vaults a specialty. We undertake everything at the most moderate prices. Our firm executed the magnificent monument erected to the fair Esther Gobseck at Lucien de Rubempré, one of the finest ornaments of Père Lachaise. We only employ the best workmen, and I must warn you, sir, against small contractors, who turn out nothing but trash," he added, seeing that another person in a black suit was coming up to say a word for another firm of marble workers. It is often said that death is the end of a journey, but the aptness of the simile is realized most fully in Paris. Any arrival, especially of a person of condition, upon the dark brink, is hailed in much the same way as the traveller recently landed is hailed by hotel touts and pestered with their recommendations. With the exception of a few philosophically minded persons, or here and there a family secure of handing down a name to posterity, nobody thinks beforehand of the practical aspects of death. Death always comes before he is expected, and, from a sentiment easy to understand, the heirs usually act as if the event were impossible. For which reason, almost every one that loses father or mother, wife or child, is immediately beset by scouts that profit by the confusion caused by grief to snare others. In former days, agents for monuments used to live round about the famous cemetery of Père Lachaise, and were gathered together in a single thoroughfare, which should by rights have been called the Street of Tombs. Issuing thence, they fell upon the relatives of the dead as they came from the cemetery, or even at the graveside. But competition and the spirit of speculation induced them to spread themselves further and further afield, till, descending into Paris itself, they reached the very precincts of the mayor's office. Indeed, the stonemason's agent has often been known to invade the house of mourning, with a design for the sepulchre in his hand. "I am in treaty with this gentleman," said the representative of the firm of Sonnet to another agent who came up. "Pons deceased," called the clerk at this moment. "Where are the witnesses?" "This way, sir," said the stonemason's agent, this time addressing Remonencq. Schmucke stayed where he had been placed on the bench, an inert mass. Remonencq begged the agent to help him, and together they pulled Schmucke towards the balustrade, behind which the registrar shelters himself from the mourning public. Remonencq, Schmucke's providence, was assisted by Dr. Poulain, who filled in the necessary information as to Pons's age and birthplace. The German knew but one thing, that Pons was his friend. So soon as the signatures were affixed, Remonencq and the doctor, followed by the stonemason's man, put Schmucke into a cab, the desperate agent whisking in afterwards, bent upon taking a definite order. La Sauvage, on the lookout in the gateway, half carried Schmucke's almost unconscious form upstairs. Remonencq and the agent went up with her. "He will be ill," exclaimed the agent, anxious to make an end of the piece of business which, according to him, was in progress. "I should think he will," returned Mme. Sauvage. "He has been crying for 24 hours on end, and he would not take anything. There is nothing like grief for giving one a sinking in the stomach." "My dear client," urged the representative of the firm of Sonnet, "do take some broth. You have so much to do. Some one must go to the Hôtel de Ville to buy the ground in the cemetery on which you mean to erect a monument to perpetuate the memory of the friend of the arts, and bear record to your gratitude." "Why, there is no sense in this," added Madame Cantinet, coming in with broth and bread. "If you are as weak as this, you ought to think of finding some one to act for you," added Remonencq, "for you have a good deal on your hands, my dear sir. There is the funeral to order; you would not have your friend buried like a pauper." "Come, come, my dear sir," put in La Sauvage, seizing a moment when Schmucke laid his head back in the great chair to pour a spoonful of soup into his mouth. She fed him as if he had been a child, and almost in spite of himself. "Now, if you were wise, sir, since you are inclined to give yourself up quietly to grief, you would find some one to act for you." "As you are thinking of raising a magnificent monument to the memory of your friend, sir, you have only to leave it all to me. I will undertake—" "What is all this? What is all this?" asked La Sauvage. "Has Monsieur Schmucke ordered something? Who may you be?" "I represent the firm of Sonnet, my dear madame, the biggest monumental stonemasons in Paris," said the person in black, handing a business card to the stalwart Sauvage. "Very well, that will do. Some one will go with you when the time comes, but you must not take advantage of the gentleman's condition now. You can quite see that he is not himself." The agent led her out upon the landing. "If you will undertake to get the order for us," he said confidentially, "I am empowered to offer you 40 francs." Madame Sauvage grew placable. "Very well, let me have your address," said she. Schmucke, meantime, being left to himself, and feeling the stronger for the soup and bread that he had been forced to swallow, returned at once to Pons's rooms and to his prayers. He had lost himself in the fathomless depths of sorrow, when a voice, sounding in his ears, drew him back from the abyss of grief, and a young man in a suit of black returned for the 11th time to the charge, pulling the poor tortured victim's coat-sleeve until he listened. "Sir," said he. "What is it now?" "Sir, we owe a supreme discovery to Dr. Gannal. We do not dispute his fame. He has worked miracles of Egypt afresh, but there have been improvements made upon his system. We have obtained surprising results. So, if you would like to see your friend again, as he was when he was alive—" "See him again?" cried Schmucke. "Shall he speak to me?" "Not exactly. Speech is the only thing wanting," continued the embalmer's agent. "But he will remain as he is after embalming for all eternity. The operation is over in a few seconds. Just an incision in the carotid artery and an injection. But it is high time. If you wait one single quarter of an hour, sir, you will not have the sweet satisfaction of preserving the body." "Go to der Teufel! Bons is ein spirit, und that spirit is in heaven." "That man has no gratitude in his composition," remarked the youthful agent of one of the famous Ganal's rivals. "He will not embalm his friend." The words were spoken under the archway, and addressed to La Cibot, who had just submitted her beloved to the process. "What would you have, sir?" she said. "He is the heir, the universal legatee. Chapter 28 of Cousin Pons by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by Ellen Marriage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 28. An hour later, Schmucke saw Madame Sauvage come into the room, followed by another man in a suit of black, a workman to all appearance. "Cantinet has been so obliging as to send this gentleman, sir," she said. "He is coffin-maker to the parish." The coffin-maker made his bow with a sympathetic and compassionate air, but none the less he had a business-like look, and seemed to know that he was indispensable. He turned an expert's eye upon the dead. "How does the gentleman wish it to be made? Deal, plain oak, or oak lead-lined? Oak with a lead lining is the best style. The body is a stock size." He felt for the feet, and proceeded to take the measure. 1 meter 70, he added. "You will be thinking of ordering the funeral service at the church, sir, no doubt?" Schmucke looked at him as a dangerous madman might look before striking a blow. La Sauvage put in a word. "You ought to find somebody to look after all these things," she said. "Yes," the victim murmured at length. "Shall I fetch Monsieur Tabareau? For you will have a good deal on your hands before long. Monsieur Tabareau is the most honest man in the quarter, you see." "Yes, Monsieur Tabareau. Somebody was speaking of him just now," said Schmucke, completely beaten. "Very well. You can be quiet, sir, and give yourself up to grief when you have seen your deputy." It was nearly 2 o'clock when Monsieur Tabareau's head clerk, a young man who aimed at a bailiff's career, modestly presented himself. Youth has wonderful privileges. No one is alarmed by youth. This young man, Villemot by name, sat down by Schmucke's side and waited his opportunity to speak. His diffidence touched Schmucke very much. "I am Monsieur Tabareau's head clerk, sir," he said. "He sent me here to take charge of your interests and to superintend the funeral arrangements. Is this your wish?" "You cannot save my life. I have not long to live, but you will leave me in peace." "Oh, you shall not be disturbed," said Villemot. "Ver gut. What must I do for dat?" "Sign this paper appointing Monsieur Tabareau to act for you in all matters relating to the settlement of the affairs of the deceased." "Good, give it to me," said Schmucke, anxious only to sign it at once. "No, I must read it over to you first." "Read it over." Schmucke paid not the slightest attention to the reading of the power of attorney, but he set his name to it. The young clerk took Schmucke's orders for the funeral, the interment, and the burial service, undertaking that he should not be troubled again in any way, nor asked for money. "I would give all that I have to be left in peace," said the unhappy man, and once more he knelt beside the dead body of his friend. Fraisier had triumphed. Villemot and La Sauvage completed the circle which he had traced about Pons's heir. There is no sorrow that sleep cannot overcome. Towards the end of the day, La Sauvage, coming in, found Schmucke stretched asleep at the bed-foot. She carried him off, put him to bed, tucked him in maternally, and till the morning Schmucke slept. When he awoke, or rather when the truce was over and he again became conscious of his sorrows, Pons's coffin lay under the gateway in such a state as a third-class funeral may claim, and Schmucke, seeking vainly for his friend, wandered from room to room across vast spaces, as it seemed to him, empty of everything save hideous memories. La Sauvage took him in hand, much as a nurse manages a child. She made him take his breakfast before starting for the church, and while the poor sufferer forced himself to eat, she discovered, with lamentations worthy of Jeremiah, that he had not a black coat in his possession. La Cibot took entire charge of his wardrobe. Since Pons fell ill, his apparel, like his dinner, had been reduced to the lowest terms, to a couple of coats and 2 pairs of trousers. "And you are going just as you are to Monsieur Pons's funeral? It is an unheard-of thing. The whole quarter will cry shame upon us." "Und how will you that I go?" "Why, in mourning." "Mourning?" "It is the proper thing." "Der proper thing! Confound all this stupid nonsense!" cried poor Schmucke, driven to the last degree of exasperation which a childlike soul can reach under stress of sorrow. "Why, the man is a monster of ingratitude," said La Sauvage, turning to a personage who just then appeared. At the sight of this functionary, Schmucke shuddered. The newcomer wore a splendid suit of black knee-breeches, black silk stockings, a pair of white cuffs, an extremely correct white muslin tie, and white gloves. A silver chain with a coin attached ornamented his person. A typical official, stamped with the official expression of decorous gloom, an ebony wand in his hand by way of insignia of office, he stood waiting with a 3-cornered hat adorned with the tricolour cockade under his arm. "I am the master of the ceremonies," this person remarked in a subdued voice. Accustomed daily to superintend funerals, to move among families plunged in one and the same kind of tribulation, real or feigned, this man, like the rest of his fraternity, spoke in hushed and soothing tones. He was decorous, polished, and formal, like an allegorical stone figure of death. Schmucke quivered through every nerve, as if he were confronting his executioner. "Is this gentleman the son, brother, or father of the deceased?" inquired the official. "I am all that and more besides. I am his friend," said Schmucke, through a torrent of weeping. "Are you his heir?" "Heir," repeated Schmucke. "Nothing matters to me more in this world," returning to his attitude of hopeless sorrow. "Where are the relatives, the friends?" asked the master of the ceremonies. "All here," exclaimed the German, indicating the pictures and rarities. "Not one of dem have ever given bane to mein poor Pons. Here is everydings dot he loved, after me." Schmucke had taken his seat again, and looked as vacant as before. He dried his eyes mechanically. Villemot came up at that moment. He had ordered the funeral, and the master of the ceremonies, recognizing him, made an appeal to the newcomer. "Well, sir, it is time to start. The hearse is here, but I have not often seen such a funeral as this. Where are the relatives and friends?" "We have been pressed for time," replied Villemot. "This gentleman was in such deep grief that he could think of nothing, and there is only one relative." The master of the ceremonies looked compassionately at Schmucke. This expert in sorrow knew real grief when he saw it. He went across to him. Come, take heart, my dear sir. Think of paying honor to your friend's memory. We forgot to send out cards, but I took care to send a special message to Monsieur le Président de Marville, the one relative that I mentioned to you. There are no friends. Monsieur Pons was conductor of an orchestra at a theatre, but I do not think that anyone will come. This gentleman is the universal legatee, I believe." "Then he ought to be chief mourner," said the master of the ceremonies. "Have you a black coat?" he continued, noticing Schmucke's costume. "I am all in black inside," poor Schmucke replied in heartrending tones. "So black it is dot I feel death in me. God in heaven is going to have pity upon me. He will send me to mein friend in der grave, and I dank him for it." He clasped his hands. "I have told our management before now that we ought to have a wardrobe department and lend the proper mourning costumes on hire," said the master of the ceremonies, addressing Villemot. "It is a want that is more and more felt every day, and we have even now introduced improvements. But as this gentleman is chief mourner, he ought to wear a cloak, and this one that I have brought with me will cover him from head to foot. No one need know that he is not in proper mourning costume. Will you be so kind as to rise?" Schmucke rose, but he tottered on his feet. "Support him," said the master of the ceremonies, turning to Villemot. "You are his legal representative." Villemot held Schmucke's arm while the master of the ceremonies invested Schmucke with the ample, dismal-looking garment worn by heirs at law in the procession to and from the house and the church. He tied the black silken cords under the chin, and Schmucke, as heir, was in full dress. "And now comes a great difficulty," continued the master of the ceremonies. "We want 4 bearers for the pall. If nobody comes to the funeral, who is to fill the corners? It is 10:30 already," he added, looking at his watch. "They are waiting for us at the church." "Oh, here comes Fraisier!" Villemot exclaimed, very imprudently, but there was no one to hear the tacit confession of complicity. "Who is this gentleman?" inquired the master of the ceremonies. "Oh, he comes on behalf of the family." "Whose family?" "The disinherited family. He is Monsieur Camusot de Marville's representative." "Good," said the master of the ceremonies with a satisfied air. "We shall have 2 pall-bearers, at any rate, you and he." And, happy to find 2 of the places filled up, he took out some wonderful white buckskin gloves, and politely presented Fraisier and Villemot with a pair apiece. "If you gentlemen will be so good as to act as pall-bearers," said he. Fraisier, in black from head to foot, pretentiously dressed, with his white tie and official air, was a sight to shudder at. He embodied 100 briefs. "Willingly, sir," said he. "If only 2 more persons will come, the 4 corners will be filled up," said the master of the ceremonies. At that very moment, the indefatigable representative of the firm of Sonnet came up, and, closely following him, the man who remembered Pons and thought of paying him a last tribute of respect. This was a supernumerary at the theatre, the man who put out the scores on the music stands for the orchestra. Pons had been wont to give him a 5-franc piece once a month, knowing that he had a wife and family. "Oh, Dobinard!" "Topinard!" Schmucke cried out at the sight of him. "You love Pons!" "Why, I have come to ask news of Monsieur Pons every morning, sir." "Every morning, poor Dobinard!" And Schmucke squeezed the man's hand. "But they took me for a relation, no doubt, and did not like my visits at all. I told them that I belonged to the theatre and came to inquire after Monsieur Pons, but it was no good. They saw through that dodge, they said. I asked to see the poor dear man, but they never would let me come upstairs." "Dat abominable Zipod," said Schmucke, squeezing Topinard's horny hand to his heart. "He was the best of men, that good Monsieur Pons. Every month he used to give me 5 francs. He knew that I had 3 children and a wife. My wife has gone to the church." "I shall divide mine bread mit you," cried Schmucke, in his joy at finding at his side some one who loved Pons. "If this gentleman will take a corner of the pall, we shall have all 4 filled up," said the master of the ceremonies. There had been no difficulty over persuading the agent for monuments. He took a corner the more readily when he was shown the handsome pair of gloves which, according to custom, was to be his property. "11:15. We absolutely must go down. They are waiting for us at the church." The 6 persons thus assembled went down the staircase. The cold-blooded lawyer remained a moment to speak to the 2 women on the landing. "Stop here and let nobody come in," he said, "especially if you wish to remain in charge, Madame Cantinet. Aha! 2 francs a day, you know." By a coincidence in no wise extraordinary in Paris, 2 hearses were waiting at the door, and 2 coffins standing under the archway. Cibot's funeral, and the solitary state in which Pons was lying, was made even more striking in the street. Schmucke was the only mourner that followed Pons's coffin. Schmucke, supported by one of the undertaker's men, for he tottered at every step. From the Rue de Normandie to the Rue d'Orléans and the Church of Saint François, the 2 funerals went between a double row of curious onlookers. For everything, as was said before, makes a sensation in the quarter. Everyone remarked the splendor of the white funeral car, with a big embroidered P suspended on the hatchment, and the one solitary mourner behind it; while the cheap bier that came after it was followed by an immense crowd. Happily, Schmucke was so bewildered by the throng of idlers and the rows of heads in the windows that he heard no remarks, and only saw the faces through a mist of tears. "Oh, it is the Nutcracker," said one, "the musician, you know." "Who can the pall-bearers be?" "Pooh! Play actors." "I say, just look at poor old Cibot's funeral. There is one worker the less. What a man! He could never get enough of work." "He never went out." "He never kept Saint Monday." "How fond he was of his wife." "Ah, there is an unhappy woman." Remonencq walked behind his victim's coffin. People condoled with him on the loss of his neighbor. The 2 funerals reached the church. Cantinet and the doorkeeper saw that no beggars troubled Schmucke. Villemot had given his word that Pons's heir should be left in peace. He watched over his client and gave the requisite sums, and Cibot's humble bier, escorted by 60 or 80 persons, drew all the crowd after it to the cemetery. At the church door, Pons's funeral procession mustered 4 mourning coaches, 1 for the priest and 3 for the relations, but 1 only was required, for the representative of the firm of Sonnet departed during Mass to give notice to his principal that the funeral was on the way, so that the design for the monument might be ready for the survivor at the gates of the cemetery. A single coach sufficed for Fraisier, Villemot, Schmucke, and Topinard; but the remaining 2, instead of returning to the undertaker, followed in the procession to Père Lachaise. A useless procession, not unfrequently seen. There are always too many coaches when the dead are unknown beyond their own circle, and there is no crowd at the funeral. Dear indeed, the dead must have been in their lifetime if relative or friend will go with them so far as the cemetery in this Paris, where everyone would fain have 25 hours in the day. But with the coachmen it is different. They lose their tips if they do not make the journey. So, empty or full, the morning coaches go to the church and cemetery, and return to the house for gratuities. A death is a sort of drinking fountain for an unimagined crowd of thirsty mortals. The attendants at the church, the poor, the undertaker's men, the drivers and sextons, are creatures like sponges that dip into a hearse and come out again saturated. From the church door, where he was beset with a swarm of beggars, promptly dispersed by the beadle, to Père Lachaise, poor Schmucke went as criminals went in old times from the Palais de Justice to the Place de Grève. It was his own funeral that he followed, clinging to Topinard's hand, to the one living creature besides himself who felt a pang of real regret for Pons's death. As for Topinard, greatly touched by the honor of the request to act as pallbearer, content to drive in a carriage the possessor of a new pair of gloves, it began to dawn upon him that this was to be one of the great days of his life. Schmucke was driven passively along the road, as some unlucky calf is driven in a butcher's cart to the slaughter-house. Fraisier and Villemot sat with their backs to the horses. Now, as those know whose sad fortune it has been to accompany many of their friends to their last resting place, all hypocrisy breaks down in the coach during the journey, often a very long one, from the church to the Eastern Cemetery, to that one of the burying grounds of Paris, in which all vanities, all kinds of display are met, so rich is it in sumptuous monuments. On these occasions, those who feel least begin to talk soonest, and in the end the saddest listen, and their thoughts are diverted. "Monsieur le Président has already started for the court," Fraisier told Villemot, "and I did not think it necessary to tear him away from business. He would have come too late in any case. He is the next of kin, but as he has been disinherited, and Monsieur Schmucke gets everything, I thought that if his legal representative were present, it would be enough." Topinard lent an ear to this. "Who was the queer customer that took the fourth corner?" continued Fraisier. "He is an agent for a firm of monumental stonemasons. He would like an order for a tomb, on which he proposes to put 3 sculptured marble figures, music, painting, and sculpture, shedding tears over the deceased." "It is an idea," said Fraisier. "The old gentleman certainly deserved that much, but the monument would cost 700 or 800 francs." "Oh, quite that." "If Monsieur Schmucke gives the order, it cannot affect the estate. You might eat up a whole property with such expenses." "There would be a lawsuit, but you would gain it." "Very well," said Fraisier, "then it will be his affair. It would be a nice practical joke to play upon the monument makers," Fraisier added in Villemot's ear. "For if the will is upset, and I can answer for that, or if there is no will at all, who would pay them?" Villemot grinned like a monkey, and the pair began to talk confidentially, lowering their voices. But the man from the theatre, with his wits and senses sharpened in the world behind the scenes, could guess at the nature of their discourse. In spite of the rumbling of the carriage and other hindrances, he began to understand that these representatives of justice were scheming to plunge poor Schmucke into difficulties. And when at last he heard the ominous word Clichy, the honest and loyal servitor of the stage made up his mind to watch over Pons's friend. At the cemetery, where 3 square yards of ground had been purchased through the good offices of the firm of Sonnet, Villemot having announced Schmucke's intention of erecting a magnificent monument, the master of ceremonies led Schmucke through a curious crowd to the grave into which Pons's coffin was about to be lowered. But here, at the sight of the square hole, the four men waiting with ropes to lower the bier, and the clergy saying the last prayer for the dead at the graveside, Chapter 29 of Cousin Pons by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by Ellen Marriage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 29. Sonet's agent and Monsieur Sonet himself came to help Topinard to carry poor Schmucke into the marble works hard by, where Madame Sonet and Madame Vitelot, Sonet's partner's wife, were eagerly prodigal of efforts to revive him. Topinard stayed. He had seen Fraisier in conversation with Sonet's agent, and Fraisier, in his opinion, had gallows bird written on his face. An hour later, towards 2:30, the poor innocent German came to himself. Schmucke thought that he had been dreaming for the past 2 days. If he could only wake, he should find Pons still alive. So many wet towels had been laid on his forehead, he had been made to inhale salts and vinegar to such an extent that he opened his eyes at last. Madame Sonet made him take some meat soup, for they had put the pot on the fire at the marble works. Our clients do not often take things to heart like this. Still, it happens once in a year or two. At last Schmucke talked of returning to the Rue de Normandie, and at this Sonet began at once. "Here is the design, sir," he said. "Vitelot drew it expressly for you, and sat up last night to do it, and he has been happily inspired. It will look fine." "One of the finest in Père Lachaise," said the little Madame Sonet. "But you really ought to honor the memory of a friend who left you all his fortune." The design, supposed to have been drawn on purpose, had, as a matter of fact, been prepared for de Marsay, the famous cabinet minister. His widow, however, had given the commission to Stidmann. People were disgusted with the tawdriness of the project, and it was refused. The three figures at that period represented the 3 days of July which brought the eminent minister to power. Subsequently, Sonet and Vitelot had turned the 3 glorious days, les trois glorieuses, into the army, finance, and the family, and sent in the design for the sepulchre of the late lamented Charles Keller. And here again Stidmann took the commission. In the 11 years that followed, the sketch had been modified to suit all kinds of requirements, and now, in Vitelot's fresh tracing, they reappeared as music, sculpture, and painting. "It is a mere trifle when you think of the details and cost of setting it up, for it will take 6 months," said Vitelot. "Here is the estimate and the order form, 7,000 francs, sketch in plaster not included." "If Monsieur Schmucke would like marble," put in Sonet, marble being his special department, "it would cost 12,000 francs, and Monsieur would immortalize himself as well as his friend." Topinard turned to Vitelot. "I have just heard that they are going to dispute the will," he whispered, "and the relatives are likely to come by their property. Go and speak to Monsieur Camusot, for this poor harmless creature has not a farthing." "This is the kind of customer that you always bring us," said Madame Vitelot, beginning a quarrel with the agent. Topinard led Schmucke away, and they returned home on foot to the Rue de Normandie, for the morning coaches had been sent back. "Do not leave me," Schmucke said when Topinard had seen him safe into Madame Sauvage's hands, and wanted to go. "It is 4 o'clock, dear Monsieur Schmucke. I must go home to dinner. My wife is a box opener; she will not know what has become of me. The theatre opens at 5:45, you know." "Yes, I know. But remember that I am alone in the earth, that I have no friend. You that have shed a tear for Bons enlighten me. I am in deep darkness, and Bons said that I was in their midst of scoundrels." I have seen that plainly already. I have just prevented them from sending you to Clichy."
"Clichy?" repeated Schmucke. "I do not understand."
"Poor man! Well, never mind. I will come to you. Good bye."
"Good bye. Come again soon,"
said Schmucke, dropping half dead with weariness. "Good bye, monsieur," said Mme. Sauvage, and there was something in her tone that struck Topinard. "Oh, come, what is the matter now?" he asked banteringly. "You are attitudinizing like a traitor in a melodrama. Traitor yourself, why have you come meddling here? Do you want to have a hand in the master's affairs, and swindle him, eh?" "Swindle him! Your very humble servant," Topinard answered with superb disdain. "I am only a poor super at a theatre, but I am something of an artist, and you may as well know that I never asked anything of anybody yet. Who asked anything of you? Who owes you anything, eh, old lady? You are employed at a theatre, and your name is?" "Topinard, at your service." "Kind regards to all at home," said La Sauvage, "and my compliments to your missus, if you are married, mister. That was all I wanted to know." "Why, what is the matter, dear?" asked Mme. Cantinet, coming out. "This, child. Stop here and look after the dinner while I run round to speak to monsieur."
"He is down below, talking with poor Mme. Cibot, that is crying her eyes out," said Mme. Cantinet.
La Sauvage dashed down in such headlong haste that the stairs trembled beneath her tread. "Monsieur!" she called, and drew him aside a few paces to point out Topinard. Topinard was just going away, proud at heart to have made some return already to the man who had done him so many kindnesses. He had saved Pons' friend from a trap by a stratagem from that world behind the scenes in which every one has more or less ready wit. And within himself he vowed to protect a musician in his orchestra from future snares set for his simple sincerity. "Do you see that little wretch?" said La Sauvage. "He is a kind of honest man that has a mind to poke his nose into M. Schmucke's affairs." "Who is he?" asked Fraisier. "No, he is a nobody." "In business there is no such thing as a nobody." "Oh, he is employed at the theatre," said she. "His name is Topinard." "Good Mme. Sauvage, go on like this, and you shall have your tobacconist's shop." And Fraisier resumed his conversation with Mme. Cibot. "So I say, my dear client, that you have not played openly and above board with me, and that one is not bound in any way to a partner who cheats."
"And how have I cheated you?" asked La Cibot, hands on hips. "Do you think that you will frighten me with your sour looks and your frosty airs? You look about for bad reasons for breaking your promises, and you call yourself an honest man. Do you know what you are? You are a blackguard. Yes, yes, scratch your arm, but just pocket that." "No words, and keep your temper, dearie. Listen to me. You have been feathering your nest. I found this catalogue this morning while we were getting ready for the funeral. It is all in Monsieur Pons' handwriting, and made out in duplicate. And as it chanced, my eyes fell on this." And opening the catalogue, he read: "Number 7, magnificent portrait painted on marble by Sebastian del Piombo in 1546. Sold by a family who had it removed from Terni Cathedral. The picture, which represents a Knight Templar kneeling in prayer, used to hang above a tomb of the Rossi family, with a companion portrait of a bishop, afterwards purchased by an Englishman. The portrait might be attributed to Raphael, but for the date. This example is, to my mind, superior to the portrait of Baccio Bandinelli in the Musée. The latter is a little hard, while the Templar, being painted upon lavagna, or slate, has preserved its freshness of colouring. When I came to look for number 7," continued Fraisier, "I find a portrait of a lady, signed Chardin, without a number on it. I went through the pictures with the catalogue while the master of ceremonies was making up the number of pallbearers, and found that 8 of those indicated as works of capital importance by M. Pons had disappeared,
and 8 paintings of no special merit and without numbers were there instead. And finally, one was missing altogether, a little panel painting by Metzu, described in the catalogue as a masterpiece. "And was I in charge of the pictures?" demanded La Cibot. "No, but you were in a position of trust. You were Monsieur Pons' housekeeper. You looked after his affairs, and he has been robbed." "Robbed? Let me tell you this, sir. Monsieur Schmucke sold the pictures, by Monsieur Pons' orders, to meet expenses." "And to whom?" "To Messieurs Elie Magus and Remonencq." "For how much?" "I am sure I do not remember." "Look here, my dear madame, you have been feathering your nest, and very snugly. I shall keep an eye upon you. I have you safe. Help me, I will say nothing. In any case, you know that since you deemed it expedient to plunder Monsieur le Président Camusot, you ought not to expect anything from him." "I was sure that this would all end in smoke for me," said La Cibot, mollified by the words, "I will say nothing." Remonencq chimed in at this point. "Here are you finding fault with Mme. Cibot. That is not right," he said. "The pictures were sold by private treaty between M. Pons, M. Magus, and me. We waited for 3 days before we came to terms with the deceased. He slept on his pictures. We took receipts in proper form, and if we gave Mme. Cibot a few 40-franc pieces, it is the custom of the trade. We always do so in private houses when we conclude a bargain. Ah, my dear sir, if you think to cheat a defenceless woman, you will not make a good bargain. Do you understand, master lawyer? Monsieur Magus rules the market, and if you do not come down off the high horse, if you do not keep your word to Mme. Cibot, I shall wait till the collection is sold, and you shall see what you will lose if you have Monsieur Magus and me against you. We can get the dealers in a ring. Instead of realizing 700,000 or 800,000 francs, you will not so much as make 200,000. Good, good. We shall see. We are not going to sell, or if we do, it will be in London." "We know London," said Remonencq. "Monsieur Magus is as powerful there as at Paris." "Good day, madame. I shall sift these matters to the bottom," said Fraisier, "unless you continue to do as I tell you," he added. "You little pickpocket!" "Take care. I shall be a justice of the peace before long." And with threats understood to the full upon either side, they separated. "Thank you, Remonencq," said La Cibot. "It is very pleasant to a poor widow to find a champion." Towards 10 o'clock that evening, Gaudissart sent for Topinard. The manager was standing with his back to the fire in a Napoleonic attitude, a trick which he had learned since he began to command his army of actors, dancers, figurants, musicians, and stage carpenters. He grasped his left-hand brace with his right hand, always thrust into his waistcoat. The head was flung far back, his eyes gazed out into space. "Ah, I say, Topinard, have you independent means?" "No, sir." "Are you on the lookout to better yourself somewhere else?" "No, sir," said Topinard with a ghastly countenance. "Why, hang it all, your wife takes the first row of boxes out of respect to my predecessor, who came to grief. I gave you the job of cleaning the lamps in the wings in the daytime, and you put out the scores. And that is not all, either. You get 20 sous for acting monsters and managing devils when a hell is required. There is not a super that does not covet your post, and there are those that are jealous of you, my friend. You have enemies in the theatre." "Enemies?" repeated Topinard. "And you have 3 children. The oldest takes children's parts at 50 centimes." "Sir!" "You want to meddle in other people's business, and put your finger into a will case. Why, you wretched man, you would be crushed like an eggshell. My patron is His Excellency, Monseigneur le Comte Popinot, a clever man and a man of high character, whom the King in his wisdom has summoned back to the Privy Council.
This statesman, this great politician, has married his eldest son to a daughter of Monsieur le Président de Marville, one of the foremost men among the high courts of justice, one of the leading lights of the law courts. Do you know the law courts? Very good. Well, he is cousin and heir to Monsieur Pons, to our old conductor, whose funeral you attended this morning. I do not blame you for going to pay the last respects to him, poor man. But if you meddle in Monsieur Schmucke's affairs, you will lose your place. I wish very well to Monsieur Schmucke, but he is in a delicate position with regard to the heirs, and as the German is almost nothing to me, and the President and Count Popinot are a great deal, I recommend you to leave the worthy German to get out of his difficulties by himself. There is a special providence that watches over Germans, and the part of deputy guardian angel would not suit you at all. Do you see? Stay as you are. You cannot do better." "Very good, Monsieur le Directeur," said Topinard, much distressed. And in this way Schmucke lost the protector sent to him by fate, the one creature that shed a tear for Pons, the poor super for whose return he looked on the morrow. Next morning poor Schmucke awoke to a sense of his great and heavy loss. He looked round the empty rooms. Yesterday and the day before yesterday the preparations for the funeral had made a stir and bustle which distracted his eyes. But the silence which follows the day when the friend, father, son, or loved wife has been laid in the grave, the dull, cold silence of the morrow is terrible, is glacial. Some irresistible force drew him to Pons's chamber, but the sight of it was more than the poor man could bear. He shrank away and sat down in the dining-room, where Madame Sauvage was busy making breakfast ready. Schmucke drew his chair to the table, but he could eat nothing. A sudden, somewhat sharp ringing of the door-bell rang through the house, and Madame Cantinet and Madame Sauvage allowed 3 black-coated personages to pass. First came Vitel, the justice of the peace, with his highly respectable clerk. Third was Fraisier, neither sweeter nor milder for the disappointing discovery of a valid will cancelling the formidable instrument so audaciously stolen by him. "We have come to affix seals on the property," the justice of the peace said gently, addressing Schmucke. But the remark was Greek to Schmucke. He gazed in dismay at his 3 visitors. "We have come at the request of Monsieur Fraisier, legal representative of Monsieur Camusot de Marville, heir of the late Pons," added the clerk. "The collection is here in this great room, and in the bedroom of the deceased," remarked Fraisier. "Very well. Let us go into the next room. Pardon us, sir. Do not let us interrupt with your breakfast." The invasion struck an icy chill of terror into poor Schmucke. Fraisier's venomous glances seemed to possess some magnetic influence over his victims, like the power of a spider over a fly. Monsieur Schmucke understood how to turn a will, made in the presence of a notary, to his own advantage, he said, and he surely must have expected some opposition from the family. A family does not allow itself to be plundered by a stranger without some protest. And we shall see, sir, which carries the day, fraud and corruption, or the rightful heirs. We have a right, as next of kin, to affix seals, and seals shall be affixed. I mean to see that the precaution is taken with the utmost strictness."
"Ach, mein Gott! How have I offended against heaven?" cried the innocent Schmucke.
"There is a good deal of talk about you in the house," said La Sauvage. "While you were asleep, a little whipper-snapper in a black suit came here, a puppy that said he was Monsieur Hannequin's head clerk, and must see you at all costs. But as you were asleep and tired out with the funeral yesterday, I told him that Monsieur Villemot, Tabareau's head clerk, was acting for you,
And if it was a matter of business, I said, he might speak to Monsieur Villemot. Ah, so much the better, the youngster said. I shall come to an understanding with him. We will deposit the will at the tribunal after showing it to the president. So at that, I told him to ask Monsieur Villemot to come here as soon as he could. Be easy, my dear sir. There are those that will take care of you. They shall not shear the fleece off your back. You will have someone that has beak and claws. Monsieur Villemot will give them a piece of his mind. I have put myself in a passion once already with that abominable hussy, La Cibot, a porter's wife that sets up to judge her lodgers, forsooth, and insists that you have filched the money from the heirs. You locked Monsieur Pons up, she says, and worked upon him till he was stark, staring mad. She got as good as she gave, though, the wretched woman. You are a thief and a bad lot, I told her. You will get into the police courts for all the things that you have stolen from the gentleman. And she shut up. The clerk came out to speak to Schmucke. "Would you wish to be present, sir, when the seals are affixed in the next room?" Go on," said Schmucke. "I shall be allowed to die in peace, I presume?" "Oh, under any circumstances a man has a right to die," the clerk answered, laughing. "Most of our business relates to wills. But in my experience, the universal legatee very seldom follows the testator to the tomb." "I am going," said Schmucke. Blow after blow had given him an intolerable pain at the heart. "Oh, here comes Monsieur Villemot!" exclaimed La Sauvage. "Monsieur Villemot," said poor Schmucke, "represent me." "I hurried here at once," said Villemot. "I have come to tell you that the will is completely in order. It will certainly be confirmed by the court, and you will be put in possession. You will have a fine fortune." "I, ein fine fortune!" cried Schmucke despairingly. That he, of all men, should be suspected of caring for the money! "And meantime, what is the justice of the peace doing here with his wax candles and his bits of tape?" asked La Sauvage. "Oh, he is affixing seals. Come, Monsieur Schmucke, you have a right to be present." "No, go in yourself." "But where is the use of the seals if Monsieur Schmucke is in his own house and everything belongs to him?" asked La Sauvage, doing justice in feminine fashion and interpreting the code according to their fancy, like one and all of her sex. "Monsieur Schmucke is not in possession, madame. He is in Monsieur Pons's house. Everything will be his, no doubt, but the legatee cannot take possession without an authorization, an order from the tribunal. And if the next of kin, set aside by the testator, should dispute the order, a lawsuit is the result. And as nobody knows what may happen, everything is sealed up, and the notaries representing either side proceed to draw up an inventory during the delay prescribed by the law. And there you are." Schmucke, hearing such talk for the first time in his life, was completely bewildered by it. His head sank down upon the back of his chair. He could not support it. It had grown so heavy. Villemot, meanwhile, went off to chat with the justice of the peace and his clerk, assisting with professional coolness to affix the seals, a ceremony which always involves some buffoonery and plentiful comments on the objects thus secured, unless, indeed, one of the family happens to be present. At length the party sealed up the chamber and returned to the dining-room, whither the clerk betook himself. Schmucke watched the mechanical operation, which consists in setting the justice's seal at either end of a bit of tape stretched across the opening of a folding door, or, in the case of a cupboard or ordinary door, from edge to edge above the door-handle. "Now for this room," said Fraisier, pointing to Schmucke's bedroom, which opened into the dining-room. "But that is Monsieur Schmucke's own room," remonstrated La Sauvage, springing in front of the door. "We found the lease among the papers," Fraisier said ruthlessly. "There was no mention of Monsieur Schmucke in it. It is taken out in Monsieur Pons's name only. The whole place, and every room in it, is a part of the estate. And besides," flinging open the door, "look here, Monsieur le Juge de la Paix, it is full of pictures." "So it is." Chapter 30 of Cousin Pons by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by Ellen Marriage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 30. "Wait a bit, gentlemen," said Villemot. "Do you know that you are turning the universal legatee out of doors, and as yet his right has not been called in question?" "Yes, it has," said Fraisier. "We are opposing the transfer of the property." "And upon what grounds?" "You shall know that by and by, my boy," Fraisier replied, banteringly. "At this moment, if the legatee withdraws everything that he declares to be his, we shall raise no objections, but the room itself will be sealed, and Monsieur Schmucke may lodge where he pleases." "No," said Villemot, "Monsieur Schmucke is going to stay in his room." "And how?" "I shall demand an immediate special inquiry," continued Villemot, "and prove that we pay half the rent. You shall not turn us out. Take away the pictures, decide on the ownership of the various articles, but here my client stops, my boy." "I shall go out," the old musician suddenly said. He had recovered energy during the odious dispute. "You had better," said Fraisier. "Your course will save expense to you, for your contention would not be made good. The lease is evidence." The lease," cried Villemot. "It is a question of good faith." "That could only be proved in a criminal case, by calling witnesses. Do you mean to plunge into experts' fees, and verifications, and orders to show cause why judgment should not be given, and law proceedings generally?" "No, no," cried Schmucke in dismay. "I shall turn out. I am used to it." In practice, Schmucke was a philosopher, an unconscious cynic. So greatly had he simplified his life. 2 pairs of shoes, a pair of boots, a couple of suits of clothes, a dozen shirts, a dozen bandana handkerchiefs, 4 waistcoats, a superb pipe given to him by Pons, with an embroidered tobacco pouch. These were all his belongings. Overwrought by a fever of indignation, he went into his room and piled his clothes upon a chair. "All these are mine," he said, with simplicity worthy of Cincinnatus. "Der piano is also mine." Fraisier turned to La Sauvage. "Madame, get help," he said. "Take that piano out and put it on the landing." "You are too rough into the bargain," said Villemot, addressing Fraisier. "The justice of the peace gives orders here. He is supreme." "There are valuables in the room," put in the clerk. "And besides," added the justice of the peace, "Monsieur Schmucke is going out of his own free will." "Did any one ever see such a client?" Villemot cried indignantly, turning upon Schmucke. "You are as limp as a rag." "Vat does it matter vere one dies?" Schmucke said as he went out. "Dese men haf tiger faces. I shall send somebody to vetch mine bits of dings." "Where are you going, sir?" "Vere it shall please Gott," returned Pons's universal legatee with supreme indifference. "Send me word," said Villemot. Fraisier turned to the head clerk. "Go after him," he whispered. Madame Cantinet was left in charge, with a provision of 50 francs paid out of the money that they found. The justice of the peace looked out. There Schmucke stood in the courtyard, looking up at the windows for the last time. "You have found a man of butter," remarked the justice. "Yes," said Fraisier. "Yes, the thing is as good as done. You need not hesitate to marry your granddaughter to Poulain. He will be head surgeon at the 15-20, the asylum founded by Saint Louis for 300 blind people. We shall see. Good day, Monsieur Fraisier, said the justice of the peace with a friendly air. There is a man with a head on his shoulders, remarked the justice's clerk. The dog will go a long way. By this time it was 11 o'clock. The old German went like an automaton down the road along which Pons and he had so often walked together. Wherever he went, he saw Pons. He almost thought that Pons was by his side. And so he reached the theatre, just as his friend Topinard was coming out of it after a morning spent in cleaning the lamps and meditating on the manager's tyranny. "Oh, shoost der ting for me!" cried Schmucke, stopping his acquaintance. "Topinard, you haf a lodging somewheres, eh?" "Yes, sir." "A home of your own?" "Yes, sir." "Are you willing to take me for ein porter? Oh, I shall pay ver well. I have 900 francs of income, and I have not very long to live. I shall give no trouble whatever. I can eat onydings. I only want to schmuck mein pipe. Und you are der only one that have shed a tear for Bons mit me, and so I love you." "I shall be very glad, sir, but to begin with, Monsieur Gaudissart has given me a proper wigging." "Wigging?" "That is one way of saying that he combed my hair for me." "Combed your hair?" "He gave me a scolding for meddling in your affairs, so we must be very careful if you come to me. But I doubt whether you will stay when you have seen the place. You do not know how we poor devils live." "I should rather der poor home of a good-hearted man that have mourned Bons than der Duileries mit men dot have ein tiger face. I have just left tigers in Bons's house. They will eat up everydings." "Come with me, sir, and you shall see. But, well, anyhow, there is a garret. Let us see what Madame Topinard says." Schmucke followed like a sheep, while Topinard led the way into one of the squalid districts which might be called the cancers of Paris, a spot known as the Cité Bourdin. It is the slum out of the Rue de Bondy, a double row of houses run up by the speculative builder under the shadow of the huge mass of the Porte Saint-Martin theatre. The pavement at the higher end lies below the level of the Rue de Bondy. At the lower, it falls away towards the Rue des Mathurins du Temple. Follow its course, and you find that it terminates in another slum running at right angles to the first. The Cité Bourdin is, in fact, a T-shaped blind alley. Its two streets thus arranged contain some 30 houses, 6 or 7 stories high, and every story and every room in every story is a workshop and a warehouse for goods of every sort and description, for this wart upon the face of Paris is a miniature Faubourg Saint-Antoine. Cabinet work and brass work, theatrical costumes, blown glass, painted porcelain, all the various fancy goods known as l'article Paris are made here. Dirty and productive like commerce, always full of traffic, foot passengers, vans, and drays, the Cité Bourdin is an unsavory-looking neighborhood, with a seething population in keeping with the squalid surroundings. It is a not unintelligent artisan population, though the whole power of the intellect is absorbed by the day's manual labor. Topinard, like every other inhabitant of the Cité Bourdin, lived in it for the sake of comparatively low rent, the cause of its existence and prosperity. His 6th-floor lodging, in the second house to the left, looked out upon the belt of green garden, still in existence, at the back of 3 or 4 large mansions in the Rue de Bondy. Topinard's apartment consisted of a kitchen and 2 bedrooms. The first was a nursery with 2 little deal bedsteads and a cradle in it. The second was the bedroom, and the kitchen did duty as a dining room. Above, reached by a short ladder, known among builders as a trap ladder, there was a kind of garret, 6 feet high, with a sash window let into the roof. This room, given as a servant's bedroom, raised the Topinards' establishment from mere rooms to the dignity of a tenement, and the rent to a corresponding sum of 400 francs. An arched lobby, lighted from the kitchen by a small round window, did duty as an antechamber, and filled the space between the bedroom, the kitchen, and house doors, 3 doors in all. The rooms were paved with bricks and hung with a hideous wall-paper at 3d apiece. The chimney-pieces that adorned them were of the kind called capucines, a shelf set on a couple of brackets painted to resemble wood. Here, in these 3 rooms, dwelt 5 human beings, 3 of them children. Anyone, therefore, can imagine how the walls were covered with scores and scratches so far as an infant arm can reach. Rich people can scarcely realize the extreme simplicity of a poor man's kitchen. A Dutch oven, a kettle, a gridiron, a saucepan, 2 or 3 dumpy cooking pots, and a frying pan. That was all. All the crockery in the place, white and brown earthenware together, was not worth more than 12 francs. Dinner was served on the kitchen table, which, with a couple of chairs and a couple of stools, completed the furniture. The stock of fuel was kept under the stove, with a funnel-shaped chimney, and in a corner stood the wash-tub in which the family linen lay, often steeping overnight in soap-suds. The nursery ceiling was covered with clothes-lines. The walls were variegated with theatrical placards and woodcuts from newspapers or advertisements. Evidently the eldest boy, the owner of the school books stacked in a corner, was left in charge while his parents were absent in the theatre. In many a French working-man's family, so soon as a child reaches the age of 6 or 7, it plays the part of mother to younger sisters and brothers. From this bare outline it may be imagined that the Topinards, to use the hackneyed formula, were poor but honest. Topinard himself was verging on 40. Madame Topinard, once leader of a chorus, mistress, too, it was said, of Gaudissart's predecessor, was certainly 30 years old. Lolotte had been a fine woman in her day, but the misfortunes of the previous management had told upon her to such an extent that it had seemed to her to be both advisable and necessary to contract a stage marriage with Topinard. She did not doubt but that, as soon as they could muster the sum of 150 francs, her Topinard would perform his vows agreeably to the civil law, were it only to legitimize the 3 children whom he worshipped. Meanwhile, Madame Topinard sewed for the theatre wardrobe in the morning, and with prodigious effort the brave couple made 900 francs per annum between them. "One more flight," Topinard had twice repeated since they reached the 3rd floor. Schmucke, engulfed in his sorrow, did not so much as know whether he was going up or coming down. In another minute Topinard had opened the door, but before he appeared in his white workman's blouse, Madame Topinard's voice rang from the kitchen. "There, there, children, be quiet. Here comes papa." But the children, no doubt, did as they pleased with papa, for the oldest member of the family, sitting astride a broomstick, continued to command a charge of cavalry, a reminiscence of the Cirque Olympique. The second blew a tin trumpet, while the third did its best to keep up with the main body of the army. Their mother was at work on a theatrical costume. "Be quiet, or I shall slap you," shouted Topinard in a formidable voice. Then, in an aside for Schmucke's benefit, "Always have to say that. Here, little one," he continued, addressing his Lolotte, "this is Monsieur Schmucke, poor Monsieur Pons's friend. He does not know where to go, and he would like to live with us. I told him that we were not very spick and span up here, that we lived on the 6th floor, and had only the garret to offer him, but it was no use, he would come." Schmucke had taken the chair which the woman brought him, and the children, stricken with sudden shyness, had gathered together to give the stranger that mute, earnest, so soon finished scrutiny characteristic of childhood. For a child, like a dog, is wont to judge by instinct rather than reason. Schmucke looked up. His eyes rested on that charming little picture. He saw the performer on the tin trumpet, a little 5-year-old maiden with wonderful golden hair.
"She looks like a little German girl," said Schmucke, holding out his arms to the child.
"Monsieur will not be very comfortable here," said Mme. Topinard. "I would propose that he should have our room at once, but I am obliged to have the children near me." She opened the door as she spoke, and bade Schmucke come in. Such splendor as their abode possessed was all concentrated here. Blue cotton curtains with a white fringe hung from the mahogany bedstead and adorned the window. The chest of drawers, bureau, and chairs, though all made of mahogany, were neatly kept. The clock and candlesticks on the chimney-piece were evidently the gift of the bankrupt manager, whose portrait, a truly frightful performance of Pierre Grassou's, looked down upon the chest of drawers. The children tried to peep in at the forbidden glories. "Monsieur might be comfortable in here," said their mother.
"No, no," Schmucke replied. I have not very long to live. I only want a corner to die in."
The door was closed, and the three went up to the garret.
"This is der ding for me," Schmucke cried at once. "Before I lived mit Pons, I was never better lodged."
"Very well. A truckle bed, a couple of mattresses, a bolster, a pillow, a couple of chairs, and a table. That is all that you need to buy. That will not ruin you. It may cost 150 francs, with the crockery ware and a strip of carpet for the bedside." Everything was settled, save the money, which was not forthcoming. Schmucke saw that his new friends were very poor, and recollecting that the theatre was only a few steps away, it naturally occurred to him to apply to the manager for his salary. He went at once and found Gaudissart in his office. Gaudissart received him in the somewhat stiffly polite manner which he reserved for professionals. Schmucke's demand for a month's salary took him by surprise, but on inquiry he found that it was due. "Oh, confound it, my good man, a German can always count, even if he has tears in his eyes. I thought that you would have taken the 1,000 francs that I sent you into account as a final year's salary, and that we were quits."
"We have received nothings," said Schmucke, "and if I come to you, it is because I am in der street and have not ein benny. How did you send us der bonus?"
"By your portress."
"By Montame Zipod!" exclaimed Schmucke. "She killed Pons, she robbed him, she sold him, she tried to burn his will. She is a bad creature, a monster."
"But, my good man, how come you to be out in the street without a roof over your head or a penny in your pocket, when you are the sole heir? That does not necessarily follow, as the saying is."
"They have put me out at their door. I am a foreigner. I know noddings of de laws."
Poor man, thought Gaudissart, foreseeing the probable end of the unequal contest. "Listen," he began, "do you know what you ought to do in this business?"
"I have ein man of business."
"Very good. Come to terms at once with the next of kin. Make them pay you a lump sum of money down, and an annuity, and you can live in peace."
"I ask nothing more."
"Very well, let me arrange it for you," said Gaudissart. Fraisier had told him the whole story only yesterday, and he thought that he saw his way to making interest out of the case with the young Vicomtesse Popinot and her mother. He would finish a dirty piece of work, and some day he would be a privy councillor at least, or so he told himself.
"I give you full powers."
"Well, let me see. Now, to begin with," said Gaudissart, Napoleon of the boulevard theatres, "to begin with, here are 100 crowns." He took 15 louis from his purse and handed them to Schmucke. "That is yours on account of 6 months' salary. If you leave the theatre, you can repay me the money. Now, for your budget. What are your yearly expenses? How much do you want to be comfortable? Come now, scheme out a life for a Sardanapalus."
"I only need 2 suits of clothes, one for the winter, one for the summer."
300 francs, said Gaudissart.
"Shoes, 4 pairs."
60 francs.
"Stockings."
A dozen pairs, 36 francs.
"Half a dozen shirts."
6 calico shirts, 24 francs. As many linen shirts, 48 francs. Let us say 72. That makes 468 francs altogether. Say 500, including cravats and pocket handkerchiefs. 100 francs for the laundress, 600. And now, how much for your board? 3 francs a day?
"No, it is too much."
After all, you want hats. That brings it to 1,500. 500 more for rent, that makes 2,000. If I can get 2,000 francs per annum for you, are you willing? Good securities.
"Und mein tobacco?"
2,400 then. Oh, Papa Schmucke, do you call that tobacco? Very well, the tobacco shall be given in. So that is 2,400 francs per annum.
"That is not all. I should like some money."
Pin money, just so. Oh, these Germans, and calls himself an innocent, the old Robert Macaire, thought Gaudissart. Aloud he said, "How much do you want? But this must be the last."
"It is to pay a sacred debt."
"A debt?" said Gaudissart to himself. "What a shark it is! He is worse than an eldest son. He will invent a bill or two next. We must cut this short. This Fraisier cannot take large views. What debt is this, my good man? Speak out."
"There was but one man dat have mourned Pons with me. He have a dear little girl mit wunderschönes Haar. It was as if I saw mein poor Deutschland that I should never have left. Paris is no place for the Germans, they laugh at them," with a little nod as he spoke, and the air of a man who knows something of life in this world below.
"He is off his head," Gaudissart said to himself. And a sudden pang of pity for this poor innocent before him brought a tear to the manager's eyes.
"Ah, you understand, Monsieur le Directeur. Ver gut. Dat man mit die little daughter is Dobinard, vat tidies the orchestra and lights the lamps. Pons was very fond of him, and helped him. He was the only one that accompanied mine only friend to the church and to the grave. I want 3,000 francs for him, and 3,000 for the little one."
"Poor fellow," said Gaudissart to himself. Rough, self-made man though he was, he felt touched by this nobleness of nature, by a gratitude for a mere trifle, as the world views it, though for the eyes of this divine innocence the trifle, like Bossuet's cup of water, was worth more than the victories of great captains. Beneath all Gaudissart's vanity, beneath the fierce desire to succeed in life at all costs, to rise to the social level of his old friend Popinot, there lay a warm heart and a kindly nature, wherefore he cancelled his too hasty judgments and went over to Schmucke's side. "You shall have it all, but I will do better still, my dear Schmucke. Topinard is a good sort.
Yes, I have just been to see him in his poor home, for he is happy mit his children.
I will give him the cashier's place. Old Baudron is going to leave.
Ah, God bless you, cried Schmucke.
Very well, my good, kind fellow. Meet me at Berthier's office about 4 o'clock this afternoon. Everything shall be ready, and you shall be secured from want for the rest of your days. You shall draw your 6,000 francs, and you shall have the same salary with Garangeot that you used to have with Pons."
"No," Schmucke answered, "I shall not live. I have no heart for anydings. I feel that I am attacked."
"Poor lamb," Gaudissart muttered to himself as the German took his leave. "But after all, one lives on mutton, and as the sublime Béranger says, 'Poor sheep, you were made to be shorn.'" And he hummed the political squib by way of giving vent to his feelings. Then he rang for the office boy. "Call my carriage," he said. "Rue de Hanovre," he told the coachman. The man of ambitions by this time had reappeared. Chapter 31 of Cousin Pons by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by Ellen Marriage. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bruce Peary. Chapter 31. And Schmucke? He was busy buying flowers and cakes for Topinard's children, and went home almost joyously. "I am giving die presents," he said, and he smiled. It was the first smile for 3 months, but anyone who had seen Schmucke's face would have shuddered to see it there. "But there is ein condition." "It is too kind of you, sir," said the mother. "Die little girl shall give me a kiss, and put die flowers in her hair, like die little German maidens." "Well, good child, do just as the gentleman wishes," said the mother, assuming an air of discipline. "Do not scold my little German girl," implored Schmucke. It seemed to him that the little one was his dear Germany. Topinard came in. "3 porters are bringing up the whole bag of tricks," he said. "Oh, here are 200 francs to pay for everydings," said Schmucke. "But, mein friend, your Montame Dobinard is ver nice. You shall marry her, is it not so? I shall give you 1,000 crowns, und die little one shall have 1,000 crowns for her dowry, and you shall infest it in her name. Und you are not to be ein super any more. You are to be die cashier at the theatre." "I? Instead of old Baudron?" "Yes." "Who told you so?" "Monsieur Gaudissart." "Oh, it is enough to send one wild with joy. Eh, I say, Rosalie, what a rumpus there will be at the theatre! But it is not possible." "Our benefactor must not live in a garret." "Pshaw! For the few days that I have to live, it is very comfortable," said Schmucke. "Good-bye. I am going to the cemetery to see what they have done mit Pons, and to order some flowers for his grave." Madame Camusot de Marville was consumed by the liveliest apprehensions. At a council held with Fraisier, Berthier, and Godeschal, the 2 last-named authorities gave it as their opinion that it was hopeless to dispute a will drawn up by 2 notaries in the presence of 2 witnesses, so precisely was the instrument worded by Leopold Hannequin. Honest Godeschal said that even if Schmucke's own legal adviser should succeed in deceiving him, he would find out the truth at last, if it were only from some officious barrister, the gentleman of the robe being wont to perform such acts of generosity and disinterestedness by way of self-advertisement. And the 2 officials took their leave of the Presidente with a parting caution against Fraisier, concerning whom they had naturally made inquiries. At that very moment, Fraisier, straight from the affixing of the seals in the Rue de Normandie, was waiting for an interview with Madame de Marville. Berthier and Godeschal had suggested that he should be shown into the study. The whole affair was too dirty for the president to look into, to use their own expression, and they wished to give Madame de Marville their opinion in Fraisier's absence. "Well, madame, where are these gentlemen?" asked Fraisier, admitted to audience. "They are gone. They advise me to give up," said Madame de Marville. "Give up!" repeated Fraisier, suppressed fury in his voice. "Give up! Listen to this, madame. At the request of, and so forth, I will omit the formalities, whereas there has been deposited in the hands of Monsieur le Président of the Court of First Instance a will drawn up by Maître Léopold Hannequin and Alexandre Crottat, notaries of Paris, and in the presence of two witnesses, the Sieur Brunner and Schwab, aliens domiciled at Paris, and by the said will the Sieur Pons, deceased, has bequeathed his property to one Sieur Schmucke, a German, to the prejudice of his natural heirs, whereas the applicant undertakes to prove that the said will was obtained under undue influence and by unlawful means, and persons of credit are prepared to show that it was the testator's intention to leave his fortune to Mademoiselle Cécile, daughter of the aforesaid Sieur de Marville, and the applicant can show that the said will was extorted from the testator's weakness, he being unaccountable for his actions at the time. Whereas the Sieur Schmucke, to obtain a will in his favour, sequestrated the testator, and prevented the family from approaching the deceased during his last illness, and his subsequent notorious ingratitude was of a nature to scandalize the house and residents in the quarter, who chanced to witness it when attending the funeral of the porter at the testator's place of abode. Whereas, as still more serious charges, of which applicant is collecting proofs, will be formally made before their worships the judges, I, the undersigned registrar of the court, etc., etc., on behalf of the aforesaid, etc., have summoned the Sieur Schmucke, pleading, etc., to appear before their worships the judges of the first chamber of the tribunal, and to be present when application is made that the will received by Maître Hannequin and Crottat, being evidently obtained by undue influence, shall be regarded as null and void in law, and I, the undersigned, on behalf of the aforesaid, etc., have likewise given notice of protest should the Sieur Schmucke, as universal legatee, make application for an order to be put into possession of the estate, seeing that the applicant opposes such order, and makes objection by his application bearing date of today, of which a copy has been duly deposited with the Sieur Schmucke, costs being charged to, etc., etc. I know the man, Madame la Présidente. He will come to terms as soon as he reads this little love letter. He will take our terms. Are you going to give the 1,000 crowns per annum? Certainly. I only wish I were paying the first installment now. It will be done in 3 days. The summons will come down upon him while he is stupefied with grief, for the poor soul regrets Pons and is taking the death to heart. Can the application be withdrawn? Inquired the lady. Certainly, madame. You can withdraw it at any time. Very well, monsieur. Let it be so. Go on. Yes, the purchase of land that you have arranged for me is worth the trouble. And besides, I have managed Vitel's business. He is to retire, and you must pay Vitel's 60,000 francs out of Pons's property. So, you see, you must succeed. Have you Vitel's resignation? Yes, monsieur. Monsieur Vitel has put himself in Monsieur de Marville's hands. Very good, madame. I have already saved you 60,000 francs, which I expected to give to that vile creature, Madame Cibot. But I still require the tobacconist's license for the woman Sauvage,
and an appointment to the vacant place of head physician at the 15-20 for my friend Poulain." "Agreed. It is all arranged." "Very well. There is no more to be said. Every one is for you in this business, even Gaudissart, the manager of the theatre. I went to look him up yesterday, and he undertook to crush the workman who seemed likely to give us trouble." "Oh, I know Monsieur Gaudissart is devoted to the Popinots." Fraisier went out. Unluckily, he missed Gaudissart, and the fatal summons was served forthwith. If all covetous minds will sympathize with the Présidente, all honest folk will turn in abhorrence from her joy when Gaudissart came 20 minutes later to report his conversation with poor Schmucke. She gave her full approval. She was obliged beyond all expression for the thoughtful way in which the manager relieved her of any remaining scruples by observations which seemed to her to be very sensible and just. "I thought as I came, Madame la Présidente, that the poor devil would not know what to do with the money. 'Tis a patriarchally simple nature. He is a child, he is a German, he ought to be stuffed and put in a glass case like a waxen image. Which is to say that, in my opinion, he is quite puzzled enough already with his income of 2,500 francs, and here you are provoking him into extravagance." "It is very generous of him to wish to enrich the poor fellow who regrets the loss of our cousin," pronounced the Présidente. "For my own part, I am sorry for the little squabble that estranged Monsieur Pons and me. If he had come back again, all would have been forgiven. If you only knew how my husband misses him! Monsieur de Marville received no notice of the death, and was in despair. Family claims are sacred for him. He would have gone to the service and the interment, and I myself would have been at the mass." "Very well, fair lady," said Gaudissart. "Be so good as to have the documents drawn up, and at 4 o'clock I will bring this German to you. Please remember me to your charming daughter, the Vicomtesse, and ask her to tell my illustrious friend, the great statesman, her good and excellent father-in-law, how deeply I am devoted to him and his, and ask him to continue his valued favors. I owe my life to his uncle the judge, and my success in life to him, and I should wish to be bound to both you and your daughter by the high esteem which links us with persons of rank and influence. I wish to leave the theatre and become a serious person." "As you are already, monsieur," said the Présidente. "Adorable," returned Gaudissart, kissing the lady's shriveled fingers. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, several people were gathered together at Berthier's office. Fraisier, arch concocter of the whole scheme, Tabareau appearing on behalf of Schmucke, and Schmucke himself. Gaudissart had come with him. Fraisier had been careful to spread out the money on Berthier's desk, and so dazzled was Schmucke by the sight of the 6,000-franc bank-notes for which he had asked, and 600 francs for the first quarter's allowance, that he paid no heed whatsoever to the reading of the document. Poor man, he was scarcely in full possession of his faculties, shaken as they had already been by so many shocks. Gaudissart had snatched him up on his return from the cemetery, where he had been talking with Pons, promising to join him soon, very soon. So Schmucke did not listen to the preamble, in which it was set forth that Maître Tabareau, bailiff, was acting as his proxy, and that the Présidente, in the interests of her daughter, was taking legal proceedings against him. Altogether, in that preamble, the German played a sorry part, but he put his name to the document, and thereby admitted the truth of Fraisier's abominable allegations. And so joyous was he over receiving the money for the Topinards, so glad to bestow wealth according to his little ideas, upon the one creature who loved Pons, that he heard not a word of lawsuit nor compromise. But in the middle of the reading, a clerk came into the private office to speak to his employer. "There is a man here, sir, who wishes to speak to Monsieur Schmucke," said he. The notary looked at Fraisier, and, taking his cue from him, shrugged his shoulders. "Never disturb us when we are signing documents. Just ask his name. Is it a man or a gentleman? Is he a creditor?" The clerk went and returned. "He insists that he must speak to Monsieur Schmucke." "His name?" "His name is Topinard, he says." "I will go out to him. Sign without disturbing yourself," said Gaudissart, addressing Schmucke. "Make an end of it. I will find out what he wants with us." Gaudissart understood Fraisier. Both scented danger. "Why are you here?" Gaudissart began. "So you have no mind to be cashier at the theatre? Discretion is a cashier's first recommendation." "Sir—" "Just mind your own business. You will never be anything if you meddle in other people's affairs." "Sir, I cannot eat bread if every mouthful of it is to stick in my throat. Monsieur Schmucke! Monsieur Schmucke!" he shouted aloud. Schmucke came out at the sound of Topinard's voice. He had just signed. He held the money in his hand. "This is for the little German maiden, and for you," he said. "Oh, my dear Monsieur Schmucke, you have given away your wealth to inhuman wretches, to people who are trying to take away your good name. I took this paper to a good man, an attorney, who knows this Fraisier, and he says that you ought to punish such wickedness. You ought to let them summon you, and leave them to get out of it. Read this." And Schmucke's imprudent friend held out the summons delivered in the Cité Bourdin. Standing in the notary's gateway, Schmucke read the document, saw the imputations made against him, and, all ignorant as he was of the amenities of the law, the blow was deadly. The little grain of sand stopped his heart's beating. Topinard caught him in his arms, hailed a passing cab, and put the poor German into it. He was suffering from congestion of the brain. His eyes were dim, his head was throbbing, but he had enough strength left to put the money into Topinard's hands. Schmucke rallied from the first attack, but he never recovered consciousness, and refused to eat. 10 days afterwards he died without a complaint. To the last he had not spoken a word. Madame Topinard nursed him, and Topinard laid him by Pons's side. It was an obscure funeral. Topinard was the only mourner who followed the son of Germany to his last resting place. Fraisier, now a justice of the peace, is very intimate with the president's family, and much valued by the Présidente. She could not think of allowing him to marry that girl of Tabarot's, and promised infinitely better things for the clever man to whom she considers she owes not merely the pasture land and the English cottage at Marville, but also the president's seat in the Chamber of Deputies, for Monsieur le Président was returned at the general election in 1846. Everyone, no doubt, wishes to know what became of the heroine of a story only too veracious in its details, a chronicle which, taken with its twin sister, the preceding volume, La Cousine Bette, proves that character is a great social force. You, O amateurs, connoisseurs, and dealers, will guess at once that Pons's collection is now in question. Wherefore it will suffice if we are present during a conversation that took place only a few days ago in Count Popinot's house. He was showing his splendid collection to some visitors. "Monsieur le Comte, you possess treasures indeed," remarked a distinguished foreigner.
Oh, as to pictures, nobody can hope to rival an obscure collector, one Elie Magus, a Jew, an old monomaniac, the prince of picture lovers," the Count replied modestly. "And when I say nobody, I do not speak of Paris only, but of all Europe. When the old Croesus dies, France ought to spare 7 or 8 millions of francs to buy the gallery. For curiosities, my collection is good enough to be talked about." "But how, busy as you are, and with a fortune so honestly earned in the first instance in business—" "In the drug business," broke in Popinot, "you ask how I can continue to interest myself in things that are a drug in the market?" "No," returned the foreign visitor, "no, but how do you find time to collect? The curiosities do not come to find you." "My father-in-law owned the nucleus of the collection," said the young Vicomtesse. "He loved the arts and beautiful work, but most of his treasures came to him through me." "Through you, madame? So young! And yet have you such vices as this?" asked a Russian prince. Russians are by nature imitative, indeed, to such an extent that the diseases of civilization break out among them in epidemics. The bric-a-brac mania had appeared in an acute form in St. Petersburg, and the Russians caused such a rise of prices in the art line, as Remonencq would say, that collection became impossible. The prince who spoke had come to Paris solely to buy bric-a-brac. "The treasures came to me, Prince, on the death of a cousin. He was very fond of me," added the Vicomtesse Popinot. "And he had spent some 40-odd years since 1805 in picking up these masterpieces everywhere, but more especially in Italy." "And what was his name?" inquired the English lord. "Pons," said President Camusot. "A charming man he was," piped the Présidente in her thin flute tones. "Very clever, very eccentric, and yet very good-hearted. This fan that you admire once belonged to Madame de Pompadour. He gave it to me one morning with a pretty speech, which you must permit me not to repeat." And she glanced at her daughter. "Madame la Vicomtesse, tell us the pretty speech," begged the Russian prince. "The speech was as pretty as the fan," returned the Vicomtesse, who brought out the stereotyped remark on all occasions. "He told my mother that it was quite time that it should pass from the hands of vice into those of virtue." The English lord looked at Madame Camusot de Marville with an air of doubt, not a little gratifying to so withered a woman. "He used to dine at our house 2 or 3 times a week," she said. "He was so fond of us. We could appreciate him, and artists like the society of those who relish their wit. My husband was, besides, his one surviving relative. So when, quite unexpectedly, Monsieur de Marville came into the property, Monsieur le Comte preferred to take over the whole collection to save it from a sale by auction, and we ourselves much preferred to dispose of it in that way, for it would have been so painful to us to see the beautiful things in which our dear cousin was so much interested all scattered abroad. Elie Magus valued them, and in that way I became possessed of the cottage that your uncle built, and I hope you will do us the honor of coming to see us there." Gaudissart's theatre passed into other hands a year ago, but Monsieur Topinard is still the cashier. Monsieur Topinard, however, has grown gloomy and misanthropic. He says little. People think that he has something on his conscience. Wags at the theatre suggest that his gloom dates from his marriage with Lelotte. Honest Topinard starts whenever he hears Fraisier's name mentioned. Some people may think it strange that the one nature worthy of Pons and Schmucke
should be found on the third floor beneath the stage of a boulevard theatre. Madame Remononc, much impressed with Madame Fontaine's prediction, declines to retire to the country. She is still living in her splendid shop on the Boulevard de la Madeleine, but she is a widow now for the second time. Remononc, in fact, by the terms of the marriage contract, settled the property upon the survivor, and left a little glass of vitriol about for his wife to drink by mistake. But his wife, with the very best intentions, put the glass elsewhere, and Remononc swallowed the draught himself. The rascal's appropriate end vindicates Providence, as well as the chronicler of manners, who is sometimes accused of neglect on this head, perhaps because Providence has been so overworked by playwrights of late.